Greetings, brothers and sisters. We'll get to the Kanye stuff in a moment. That's going to be the bulk of this video. Some other stuff. But Britney Spears, if the whole world was blind, how many people would you impress? And this was the comment section. Now, she usually gets pretty much 100% support in the, right off the bat. But here, this person says, as you pose naked on the news feed, maybe you should read it again. The irony of her posting this, there's no excuse for what you posted last night. The whole world is blind if they don't see that you're still not free. I'm here for you. With your music and personality, you'd impress everyone. Those are the positive Britney fans. Judging by what you post here, it all being saucy pics, I guess you wouldn't impress anyone. This is coming from the woman QHO is constantly showing tens of millions of people naked pictures of herself. The thing is, with Britney, and who knows what's going on there. Just how crazy she is, just how whatever stage this is, whatever it might be. But the thing about Britney is, nobody wants to see those pictures, right? I mean, it's disturbing. I don't know if say nobody does, but the majority of her fans, her family, I mean, she just keeps on posting naked pictures of herself. And it's weird, right? She's an older woman. She's in her 40s and, she's had psychological issues, and there's no reason for it. Like, that's the kind of stuff women do for self-promotion. Like a woman who's a single mom and has to go strip or whatever, I mean, it doesn't have to, but does this for financial reasons, or young women who are on TikTok and they want to develop some sort of a fan base. And so that's what not TikTok, Instagram, or maybe TikTok, I don't know, right? But Britney doesn't have to do that. She's already set financially, and she's got a career, and, she can just go back and do music. I mean, the crazy dancing is one thing, but she's just posting these naked pictures, and it's weird, for no reason. There's no benefit for her. The very least, she would, she's going to piss people off, and they're going to unsubscribe, people who, their kids, and whatever it might be. Like, a lot of her followers are older women with kids, who grew up in the Britney era. I mean, she doesn't have young people followers. And so a lot of people have children, and she's posting this stuff on Instagram, right? And it doesn't make any sense. Like, she doesn't have to do it. I mean, why are you doing this, right? Like, there's no, there's no reason, there's no benefit for her to do it. But anyways, let's go to Kanye here.
It was interesting. A friend of mine told me that Chris and Kim had called him because he had influence inside of the black community, and had
Yay plus Tucker.
called him to say, to get him to influence people to take the vaccination. Mm-hmm. And I don't have an opinion on that. I just want to state that as a flat statement.
I don't know if I have that. I should find the, I've made this thing about Kanye makes the show better. I think I can find it. It's a compilation. I've done a couple of times. That Kanye, when he gets involved, it always gets better, especially for people who want to see the system's just a lie, right? The system is, everything that comes from the system. You can talk about that in terms of the BLM movement. Any movement that's backed by the beast, backed by the media, backed by the, the powers that be, is not a real movement. Like, it's just, let's say there was a truther movement that was equivalent to the BLM, and it was being covered on the mainstream news or whatever, I would be like, oh, this is fake. In fact, we've seen that to some extent. The stuff they cover in the truther movement, it's always Alec Jones or Alex Jones or whoever it is, right? And so whenever there's mainstream media coverage and there's some sort of a movement and it's got energy in it, well, it's there to further the agenda. There's an agenda, and the agenda isn't a good one. And I've said this before, like they don't have a choice because we're broke, right? I'll get back to that in a moment. The system's going to crumble because it is. I mean, that's where we are right now. Hopefully, there's some comments I want to get to. Um, but that's where we are, right? We're in a system that's crumbling. I'm in the editing process, and I just want to add that. Here's a comment from a person, and the person says, so Black Lives Matter was not a sole commentary on was a life worth anything. It is a statement that has specifically made because in America the police are truly free to kill any black human being with few consequences. Please don't water it down for the stupid people. Never was it said other lives don't matter. The thing about this is, and I wasn't commenting, this was from my video yesterday. Like I didn't comment because I didn't have time. But what happened to the movement, right? So the BLM, Black Lives Matter movement is over. And I mean, it exists and it might come back around again, but it's not getting any media coverage. It's not something where it has, achieved a goal. And so this was a specific time where the media chose to cover any police violence against people of color or police profiling black people. And has that stopped, right? Like I said years and years ago, this was in college. One of my friends from college is a black guy who grew up in the suburbs, and we got pulled over by the cops, and he was way angrier and more stressful about cops. And he was somebody who was really laid back. Like I never saw him really upset. He was like, I hate cops, and and I realized because I had just gone through something with the police where my friends and I had driven up to Providence from the Hartford area in Connecticut, Providence, Rhode Island, and we went to a sort of a party and we drank a little bit, and the party sucked, and we decided to come back, and I stopped drinking. I didn't really drink that much, and I was sobered up. But we were driving home. It was late, and I was going around a cul-de-sac, and some cop pulled me over and did a drunk test to see if I was drunk. And I was slightly drunk, but I passed, right? I could do everything because I pretty much was sober. It's just that I was tired. And if I had been arrested, it would have been, it was like Friday night, and I wouldn't have got out of jail till Monday, and my friends would have had to come up. It would have been a whole nightmare, right? And I realized that my black friend had a totally different reaction towards the police, right? A totally different experience. Not that I love cops or, my friends did, but it was different. And that's been going on for a long time. And so in the black community, there is this idea that they're being profiled and targeted. And, that's true to whatever extent. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's been something that's been around for a long time. And also in college, I had a friend who was like a part-time cop. They had these cops that did traffic duty and stuff like that. And he had a bunch of cop friends, and he said they all talked about profiling black people. So it was, it's a thing. And it's not black people. They profile certain people, right? The police do for, whatever reason. And so this isn't a problem that's existed for a long time, right? The cops are there to keep the have-nots away from the haves, to keep the, people with money safe. I mean, that's what it used to be. And now it's, it's more convoluted. But anyways, we had this movement that happened, and there's all these protests, BLM protests and Antifa protests, and it all had to do with the hatred of Trump. And, it was right before the election, and that disappeared completely. The big event happened in January, right? And that was it. It was over. We all saw it. They're still talking about that January thing 2 years later. The BLM thing lasted, what, 3 months, 4 months? And now the media doesn't cover it at all. The media, it hasn't been solved, the problem. I mean, you look at the NFL and now they have Stop Hate on their, they got slogans on their helmets and, places, but that's all, the whole thing's done. The movement's died out. It's already, once the media stopped covering the events that were, making the media go and making the movement go, then, it disappeared. Lots of money was raised, but it more had to do with Jojo Magoo getting elected, the stuff with Trump, and it fed into the January event where all these right-wing people were seeing Antifa people and these riots for BLM riots, and they thought they could do the same thing. And then, something else happened, right? And so it's just, the whole thing wasn't real. The problem's real. Lots of problems are real. But the people who run the system, they're not into solving the problem. They could have solved the problem without making a big movement about it. They didn't need protests. They didn't need any of these things. The protests were also to send a message what would happen if Trump got elected, right? This was all, under Trump's presidency. But has the problem disappeared? Is Jojo Magoo less of a racist than Trump? No. So it's not a real movement. You see all these movements that come around, they make money, they get a lot of attention, but they never solve the problem. But anyways, I look for this. I had this whole compilation of how Kanye made everything better. It was kind of funny. And, from the Taylor Swift thing, the calling George Bush doesn't like black people on that Katrina thing, to the Taylor Swift thing, to so many different ways when Kanye, and I didn't realize this for years, when he showed up, things got better, often funnier, and, they were out of the ordinary. He ran for president for a week, right? He had one event where bulletproof vests. He broke down in tears, outed that he wanted to abort his firstborn baby, right? And then, his wife wanted to file for a divorce, and that was his one and only campaign event. And it was epic, right? And then all the other stuff that he's done, whenever he shows up, the show gets more interesting, like it is now. Like, fashion industry isn't interesting at all, especially to me. I mean, it's interesting in some twisted, deviant way, but he's made it, it's whatever's going on. Like, when he shows up, it's just better. Things are funnier, and it's just not your normal news story, right? He says things, and, well, let's go back to the Tucker Carlson thing here.
But it was wild that I didn't know how close my own wife was to the Clintons.
The Clintons?
I didn't know,
Kanye in the back.
Oh.
That's the best.
I mean, cell phone away, or, hey, tell Ye to say this away, or, hey, go out and use your platform to push the vaccination away.
I mean, he's going to get into the handler thing coming up here. But that's what he's talking about. He actually says handlers at some point in this thing. But he's talking about how the Clintons and his family are both handlers, right? Handlers for each other. And, I mean, it's part of a whole, group movement.
But, yes, there was some manipulation. Me not saying I like Trump was a form of a manipulation. My so-called friends / handlers around me.
Kablawi. See, Kanye's turned into some sort of a semi-celebrity truther. But he's talking about handlers, right?
It's power and politics. Power-hungry maniacs and just control. This is 1984, mind control that we in.
And mob mentality, too.
How mob mentality.
Told me, if I said that I like Trump, that my career would be over, that my life would be over. They said
his life would be over.
That I would be killed for wearing the hat.
I can't wear that hat. I mean, come on. There's a few more Kanye things here. Kanye West hits back at Gigi Hadid, calls her a privileged Karen and a zombie. Those Hadids. The rapper posted a screenshot Thank you, everyone who knew him for a percentage of the time, knew Kanye did not treat V like a friend. +++ V loved GKG. I don't know who that is. He's watching. I'm a finna get ran over by Hollywood again. Gigi, you privileged Karen. You were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You're a zombie. You speak up here, but you didn't speak up when my child was kidnapped on her birthday. And then I thought his page was this morning. His page was deleted, but he's been posting a lot of stuff here. He got rid of his old posts here, which Kanye often does, very much like Britney. Kanye West defends White Lives Matter T-shirt on Tucker Carlson.
The White Lives Matter. You know, my dad is an educated ex-Black Panther, and he put a text to me today. He said, "White Lives Matter, ha 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 ha."
And so later on, let me get into this here. He gets into, and I'm not going to show you the whole clip because it's Fox News, the little bits and pieces here. But he talked about how Anna Wintour, who seems to be like the godfather of fashion, that none of these people would have criticized Kanye if it wasn't for her, right? So there's this whole weird fashion hierarchy and whatever it is, right? But he gets into the whole obesity thing. He talks about, which I won't show you, I'll show parts of it, how he feels that black people are being targeted to be obese so that they'll be, I guess depopulation and weakened or whatever. But this is more than just that, because we have an obesity problem across the board in America, right? Huge obesity problem.
It's like liberal Nazis that will go up and attack you. Like I said, everyone's like, Anna Wintour's your friend. I'm like...
So I'm going to skip over this, but this is where he talks about how they targeted him only because she gave them permission to do that, right? And the whole way that he felt like it was like a setup or, was all staged. But of course, from his end, he does things all the time to provoke a reaction. Like he knows how to get attention. And clearly that's intentional, because it usually happens around the time when he's trying to sell something and there's some self-promotion, right? Very little of what you see in the show is organic. It's planned for a bigger agenda, either people's personal agenda or business agenda or political agenda or the overall agenda, right? But there's always some, manipulation.
They attack her for losing weight because the media wants to put out a perception that being overweight is the new goal, when it's actually unhealthy. It's actually clinically unhealthy.
So he talks about how it's become fashionable and, people have a preference for it. Of course, we've seen it with the Kardashians and their silicone backsides, right? The Kardashians, Babylonian hoes. But, they're promoting this, right? They're promoting that people should gain weight. They're promoting obesity as being normal. And Kanye's talking about this here. I mean, he was married to somebody who was was a part of that movement.
It's demonic. It's a genocide of the black race. They want to kill us in any way they can. Planned Parenthood was made by Margaret Sanger.
Obviously, this is more than just black people, but we know from the fact that black women are 5 times more likely to get an abortion, which is underreported. The only reason to do that is to get rid of, if you're getting rid of a potential black life, right? Again, not a black life, but a human life, and you're targeting a race. See, there are a lot of things out there that are theories. There are a lot of things that are speculation. But when a certain racial group is 5 times more likely to get an abortion, that must mean the powers that be are targeting them. That's not an accident. That's not random. That's some societal structure to make that happen. Obesity is a problem, but unhealthy foods, you can look at the demographics and you can see certain groups of people, and it's also like poor white people. White people living in, trailer park areas or living in, lower class economic neighborhoods or whatever it is, right? They are going to be more likely eating processed foods. People uneducated. So you see the people who are being targeted by, basically poisons or, birth control or abortion, whatever it might be. There is some reason. Those are the people that the powers that be want to see have less children. They want to see less of those types of people. And so this isn't just specifically to, African Americans, but it is obviously a part of it, right? What Kanye's saying here is true because, there's a depopulation agenda and most of us know about it. When the powers that be believe that the world's overpopulated, and they do, I believe it is too. And, I go through a whole thing because there's the truther stuff. And no, everyone can fit in Texas. Like I'm not going to get into that again. Overpopulation is local. But there's a strain on available resources, and there's a population issue. And since that either exists legitimately or the people that are in power believe it exists, doesn't matter, they do believe it exists, so they have to target one group or another, right? I mean, you think they were not going to do anything? If we had a real population problem, overpopulation problem, and I truly believe we do. I've been to places in India, cities, 28 million people in the city. I mean, you have to really experience that. You got a lot of dumbasses who are like, no, everyone can fit in Texas. No, that's not how it works, right? Every available quality acre of land isn't given to people, regardless of what you think the Bible says or what you think manifest destiny is. People haven't been given dominion over this earth. It isn't ours to do with what we want. And the amount of resources we are consuming, and of course wealthy people, really wealthy people who consume so much, right? Like let's say you have an acre of, you have cows. You're in a lush pasture, somewhere in the, good areas where there's lots of rain, like places like in Ireland and many places in America. There's places where there's lush grass. And it's about 1 acre per cow, depending on the breed of the cow and how many cows you have, all these things, right? And if it's in the West where it's more deserty and grass is more sparse and they don't get as much rainfall, it might be 5 acres per cow. I mean, it's just all dependent on, and there's so many cows you can have because they can only move so far to graze, right? And so in terms of human beings, you have, like the royal family has 6 castles and, 1/6 of the land in the world, right? And they're not giving anything up. The people with money and power aren't going to give up their lifestyle or what they think they're entitled to. And so when there's people starving all over the world and we have population issues, pollution issues, and things like this, they're going to get rid of people. And so that's, everybody can figure that out, right? That's how they're going to have to deal with it. And they're going to target specific groups. But anyways, here's the 2 things I want to get to in the narrative, right? Bank confirms pension funds almost collapsed amid market meltdown. Official explains how promise to buy up a $65 billion of government debt staved off destructive UK financial spiral. And so Britain is financially collapsing. And London is the financial capital of the world, right? I mean, despite America's economic prowess, the economic power is centered in London, or at least it was. But, the system's collapsing. So let's go to the national debt clock again. So the national debt is at $31 trillion, just like maybe the last time I did it was at like 29. And the tax revenues, that's income tax, the collective income tax, is almost at $5 trillion. So this is our yearly income, right? This is the tax revenues. Here it is for the last 2019. You see it's $3.4 trillion. And so it goes up a little bit each year. Now it's going up a lot more, but still it's not going to ever cover the debt, right? You're not going to be able to pay off $1 trillion if you're only making, this is the revenue, this is the governmental revenue, the federal government revenue in terms of income tax, right? And the budget's already going to be more than $5 trillion, especially with the bailouts or whatever. The budget, I mean, for the last couple of years, they've spent $12 trillion in bailouts. So how are they going to pay that off? It's only $5 trillion, and it used to only be $3, right? And not just the national debt, but all the expenses and liabilities we'll get into here. Now, it's up to almost $5 trillion, which is, a little bit more. I mean, a couple $1 trillion, that's a lot. $1 trillion is a lot of money. But this is the national debt, right? And so how are you going to pay off this when your budget is always more than $5 trillion? This is American income, right? The income for the United States government, the federal government. And the income is this. And there's no other way for them to get money. And so it's U.S. federal tax revenue. And so when this is just mounting, right, and I've counted this before, it's like $1 million, $3 million a minute. The debt is accruing $3 million per minute. And so there's various levels of, taxes. There's the state taxes here, and that's $2 trillion a year. But here's the other problem. A total U.S. debt of $92 trillion. And that's gone up significantly since all the bailouts. And a lot of this stuff is going to start to, come in slowly. Then there's the currency and credit derivatives now. The printed currency, but mostly this is the derivatives market. And that's at $610 trillion. And then here's the unpaid liabilities. Social Security is $22 trillion. These are things that aren't accounted for by the U.S. budget. Okay, that's what it says here. These unfunded liabilities. It's at $171 trillion. And here, Medicaid liability is at $34 trillion. And this is just the United States. So if you calculate all of this, right, all the debt here, and then there's the total personal debt is at $23 trillion. And so where's all this money going to come from? This is your revenue right here. This is your income for the United States government. And there's people with, whatever, the U.S. total debt, the total personal debt. I mean, there's no, where are you going to get $23 trillion? Everybody's collective personal debt. How are people going to come up with $23 trillion? Currency in circulation, a direct measure of demand for Federal Reserve notes, increased by $4 billion notes, or $212 billion between June 2020 and 2021. The American GDP is $20 trillion. The global GDP is $84 trillion. So this is the gross national product. It's not even the net amount of money. But if you understand how little cash there is, printed currency worldwide, and the national debt is $31 trillion, and we have $1.5 trillion worth of printed currency, right? It's ridiculous. And then there's all this other debt. I mean, the debt is astronomical. $92 trillion of collective debt, derivatives market, $22 trillion in Social Security, $34 in Medicaid, $171 trillion in unpaid liabilities, and those are, again, things that we aren't accounting for. There's no budget for them. And then we have our annual budget of all the federal government, the employees, all the federal government stuff, the military-industrial complex, the military budget. And so our income is less than what we owe yearly in our budget. And then there's the debt, the accrued debt that we're mounting. We only have $5 trillion a year in revenues, and we have, $12 trillion worth of expenses every year. Now we've had the bailouts, right? All of this kind of stuff. And no matter what way you lay it out, right, what way you look at it, there's just not enough money. We have debt that masks as money. We have digital money that masks as value. And then, the numbers just don't add up. So let's get to the Jojo Magoo thing here. And then there's this. Biden warns risk of nuclear Armageddon is the highest since Cuban Missile Crisis. The president says the first time since 1962 that there's been a direct threat of nuclear weapons being used as Russian President Vladimir Putin's military struggles in the Ukraine.
Stark warning that the risk of nuclear Armageddon is at its highest point since the Cuban Missile Crisis nearly 60 years ago. These comments from the president come after Russian President Vladimir Putin's renewed nuclear threats have raised concerns that his plans for escalation in Ukraine may not be limited to mobilizing more troops. A lot to talk about. So good to see you and have you here. With you. So first off, of course, let's start with these comments about nuclear potential.
Exactly. Let's start with those.
Nuclear action here. How serious is this? How worried is the White House? How worried should somebody this morning be seeing this headline?
So I've been covering President Biden a long time, as you know, and I've learned one thing, which is when he's speaking at a fundraiser, the reporters are in the room, but the cameras are not rolling. Pay attention, because you often get a much more unguarded President Biden. These
You mean more truthful?
Comments certainly caught the White House by surprise. But what the president was really speaking to is an interesting
Well, he is senile, so we have that.
dynamic now as Ukraine is really seeing some real momentum on the battlefield. And it's creating, though, some concern in the White House that as Vladimir Putin is under more and more pressure, he's going to take potentially more radical steps. So you've seen the White House publicly in the last few weeks really ratcheting up the rhetoric, talking about the potential for catastrophic consequences should Vladimir Putin resort to nuclear weapons. What the president was saying is there's no way for Vladimir Putin to engage in a small tactical nuclear or potentially chemical attack without there being this kind of Armageddon. So I think this is really a warning both to our own intelligence community, but also especially to the Ukrainians, that we have to be very careful with how.
Look at her. She's all like that. That's a closed position there. Okay, so let's wrap this part up, and I'm gonna talk about this in terms of the narration at the end. But there's one more piece from Tucker Carlson and Kanye. Tucker Carlson's introduction here.
Indication that West might become a massive problem for the industrial deception complex came in 2015 and 2016 when Donald Trump appeared. And West had a very strong gut reaction to Trump that was very positive, and the people around him were panicked by this. The last thing you could have is one of the most popular pop culture figures in America coming out for Donald Trump. So they applied.
What difference does it make, right? What difference does it make if Kanye West or all the celebrities came out for Donald Trump? Like, what difference would any of it make, right? Donald Trump is himself. I mean, this is some right-wing idea that there could be a solution and Donald Trump could save America. Just like the left-wing media and people were saying that Joe Biden was going to save America for Donald Trump, and that's not happening. Like, how is that going to happen? Like, what can be done? I'm saying this, I want to get to a comment here. This was an epic comment somebody left yesterday. There's actually a couple of them. But this one, the person said, here, let me find it here. Ending every video. This was Alex Settles, Lizzo, Flutes, Kanye, and the Kardashians go at it again. Bilbo O'Reilly. So I think this is from 2 days ago. Ending every video with commentary about how our culture is imploding, the economy is collapsing, we're going to run out of food, and there's nothing we can do about it, is depressing and could trigger sensitive viewers into doing something irreversible. So why not adjust the frequency of those messages? And yes, I do know you don't care what I think, right? That's the best part, that the person is writing this knowing that this violates some boundaries or something I've put in place about giving suggestions or advice or whatever it is, right? I've said it over and over again, I don't have a complaint department, and yet people have to complain. So this person is saying that I'm being too negative or saying these things that are, the frequency of which reporting the truth, right, might be too much for sensitive people. And he himself, I believe this is a he, is being negative and critical and putting things on me that isn't my job or responsibility, right? Now, first of all, you just saw that there was a article, the two of the last articles that I shared. And if you go to my other channel today, I think this video might come out first. Usually it's the other way around. but my Hollywood celebrities dropping like flies, it talks about the uptick in young people deaths. I mean, I get into that a little bit. Like that's, national news. And England was just about to collapse financially, and that would have set off shockwaves. And the president is talking about a realistic possibility of a nuclear Armageddon. And I've read the whispers messages. There are these predictions, and Babaji, who is, I believe, to be the most reliable source when he was alive, and then his messages that came in the Whispers of the Brighter World from the Sahaj Marg tradition, talked about all these upheavals that had to happen at the end of our civilization, right? And so that's what I understand to be the truth. And so that's what I present here. I present the truth. People's ability to decipher it and handle it is on them, right? I can't control how they take in information, how they, process information, and the decisions they make because of it. But we all know that the mainstream media is lying to us. So this idea that there's sensitive people out there that can't handle even these ideas, these abstract ideas that part of us doesn't believe. There's part of me that doesn't believe. We all don't believe it's going to happen because it's never happened before. It's something new. Nuclear Armageddon, that's new. Worldwide economic collapse, that's new. And so all we've known is the growth of our economy, the growth of our lifestyle, the growth of our technology, and that's our reality. And even to the point of death, right? We all know we're going to die, but no one prepares for it. And even more importantly, the death of loved ones, or the death of things we like in our lives, people and systems and privileges and, whatever it might be. Things are ending, everything ends, and we're not very good at processing that because our system has always been about the creative, creating something new. And death is more or less ignored. The destructive aspect of life is not prepared for by our system and by the powers that be. We're not supposed to focus on that. You're supposed to live until you die or somebody else dies, and then you get hit by reality that everything ends, right? It's always tougher when a loved one dies or something that you really love dies, right? You really, whatever it might be. It could be a TV show goes off the air. It could be I don't know, hot water doesn't, no longer have hot water, and whatever your lifestyle is, whatever the things that you really, even things you take for granted disappear, you have to adjust to that, right? You have to be able to change and adapt. And people who are too weak to do that, well, they're just going to collapse, right? And the older you get, people in my generation, and, you don't have as much fight left. I don't know how much, I can endure personally in terms of change, even though I'm prepared. At least I've accepted this is going to happen, right? But how much I can adapt, how much the people in my generation can adapt, people older than me certainly, and then younger generation of weaker people, it's whether you can adjust to losing things or whether you can survive or endure a paradigm shift. And even if none of that happens, you're still going to die yourself and things are going to change in your life, right? Whatever extent that the overall system happens, you're going to have your own personal apocalypse, right? That's the difference here is I make light of the situation, right? But people who are too sensitive to even handle the ideas of these things happening, then, they shouldn't even be here, right? I don't know where they should be, but the information is out there. I'm not making it up, right? The information's coming from all these different directions. I had my own personal, I'm going through my own personal situation to do with the Heartfulness organization and the current president and master of the system. You guys are watching the Journey series, the scam, the Brighter Minds scam, and some of these other things that have happened, and just, unthinkable things for people who practice the system. And people are saying, well, no, it was always a scam, or, this is people who are, they have a different belief system, and they don't know how great the Sahaj Marg system is, and they don't know its role, or they don't believe what I believe, or whatever. They don't understand it. You can't understand it. But for those of us who do, most people in the system can't even accept what I've learned has happened here, right? In terms of the collapse of the current masters of the system's mastery and his presidency, and just, at a time when the world needs what the Sahaj Marg system is designed for, which is to bring people closer to God, connect people to God directly, internally. That is the solution, in my understanding. And it's been the solution in my life, right? And so for the system to collapse right now, and, the way it went down, and, just all of it, I mean, it's a complete bummer for me, right? But I had to accept it. Like, I had to adjust to that reality. You get disappointed. Things happen in your life. And can you endure them? People have become weaker and weaker and can't even endure the slightest bit of pain and whatever it might be. So only the strong survive, right? And so, my job here is to tell people the truth the best way I can, in terms of my understanding, and the best, possible way to frame it. But whatever's coming's coming, right? And most of us sense it. And so, if people are crazy or weak, or, this person says sensitive, I don't think that that's a good way to characterize it, mentally ill or whatever it might be, then, they're not going to handle, if they can't handle just the ideas of these things happening, how are they going to handle it when things actually start happening, right? And it's not coming from me. I mean, you have this in the mainstream media, even in terms of the, possibility of war, and even now flirting with economic collapse. And, they're always going to pretend there's a solution, but there is none. Like, there's no solution to this system. I mean, in terms of when it dies, but it's not a good system. It's not sustainable. It was always a short-lived system. And we know that from the historical use of what's called the usury system. One of the first things I watched on the economy when I was just learning about this stuff, like, I don't have a good economic mind, and I didn't understand how to even balance a checkbook. I've never been great at, I understood it, but I was too lazy, I've had my own issues with the financial system. Like, my friends all were going into business in terms of their, majors in college and things, and I just don't have even now. So when I first started to learn about this, I came across a video, and it had all these famous historical figures, many of them politicians, some of them spiritual leaders, going back to ancient times, talking about the usury system, which is a debt-based system we're using now. And they talked about exactly what's happening here. It is a bogus system. It's a scam, and it's not sustainable. It's not solvent, right? It's an insolvent system. And eventually the debt becomes, so astronomical that you can no longer fudge the numbers or pretend. And people get panicked. People in power get panicked. And they all, want to cash out and grab land or grab some sort of whatever it might be, hard assets for when the system implodes. And, the Great Depression was just that was right after that America went to a real usury system in terms of the Federal Reserve and, all of the debt-based aspect of that, going to a currency that was no longer backed by gold and all these things. It had already been in place, but it was much worse. And almost immediately, there was the Depression. And there's been all these ways that they fudged the numbers and done things to stop that from happening, right? Something like that. Total economic collapse. But eventually it's going to have to happen because there's just too much debt. There's like $2 quadrillion worth of debt or more, and it's being traded around like it's wealth, like it has value, and it's just arbitrary. And so that's going to happen at some point. And probably in the near future, you're going to see catastrophic changes to the economic system, and then all the other things to go with it, the wars and the collapse of civilization, and all the things that happen when a system dies collectively. Like, we all have our own personal deaths and things we have to process. We have to go through our own death process. Our family members, we all have that individually, but when a whole system collapses, a way of life, all of it. And this has happened over and over again throughout history. And people have to prepare for such things, especially young people, because some people have to endure it and move on, right? The things that have happened in country after country, invaded by other countries and country destroyed, some natural disaster, a city, a volcano, earthquakes, some kind of epic storms or whatever it might be, plagues, diseases, and whatever, has caused some epic collapse to a collective group of people. And then having to redo a new system and adjust to a new lifestyle and all these things. It happens all the time. It's part of human life. It happens to animals. Like animals have to endure these things, right? I saw this movie called The Impossible, which was I guess based on a true story of a family that went through a tsunami and they were on vacation somewhere in some tropical place, and they went through a tsunami, and there's a tidal waves, and the whole family. Well, I'm a spoiler alert, right? It's an old movie from 2012, but it starts off with the son who's the guy who eventually would play Spider-Man, right? So he's a young actor in this movie. He's, a teenager, 10, 11 years old. And the tsunami sweeps through, and him and his mom are fighting. They're just like, in the water, banging into things and, trying to survive, right? And they have, cuts and wounds. His mom's got a big open wound and all these things. And you just assume the dad, who had two little kids, and he was holding the two kids as the wave came in, right? And then you think they're dead, and the mom and the son, they're split up, and then, it ends up being the dad survived with the two little kids, and he's looking for the mom and the son, and just, all of it. And they're searching through this, devastated place for the family, right? The mom dies. This whole thing. Interesting movie in the sense of it's based in a true story, but people go through things. Of course, I went through the flood in India, which wasn't as bad, but it was, people died in it, and it was, whatever it is, right? And when you see things like that, you experience situations like that, traumatic situations, the collapse of a government, a natural disaster, or whatever, or even on a personal level, your house burns down, or any number of things. Like, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to cope with it? How are you going to endure those things, right? And people who can't, it's just like only the strong survive, right? This is what happens in nature. If you collapse, you collapse, right? If you give up, you give up. I mean, whatever you might, people who are mentally weak, people who are, whatever it is, right? People who are just disconnected from reality and natural life, and they don't have it in them. They're just going to curl up in the fetal position. That's what's going to happen when there's an epic change. Like I said, it can happen in your personal life. You could lose people in your life and some family tragedy or whatever it is. And how do you endure it? Like, what do you do? And after a while, you just don't have to fight for it. That's why, you have married couples, and as they get older, one dies, and a few months later, the other dies. They just give up, right? People just, it's like, all right, they could survive, but why? Why would they, right? They're, the person they love the most, the person that they're most, people who have, good marital relationships and spend a lot of time and, connectivity and dependence and love and these things. And they just, one dies and the other one's like, why am I even, what's my purpose now, right? It happens when your siblings start to die, your brothers and sisters, your, friends, your childhood friends, and people, your age group, and people who are connected, live in the same town. They have a generation of people they went to high school with, and, people who are still connected with those people. Other people move away and whatever. But the people in your generation start dying, right? People that are famous, people who are, that you knew in your life, family members. And you realize, like, I'm the only one left, right? If you're one of the younger people, at some point, my sister has cancer, my brother's older, I have older siblings, I'm the youngest in the family. Eventually all my, I'm not in much contact with them, but, you have a generation of people, right? The generations are so different now. My generation, the hippie generation, before the boomer generation, I was right on the cusp between the boomer and Generation X. I consider myself a Generation X person. I consider my older siblings boomers because they were all boomers. Like, I was born in 1964, and there's that's with the overlap between Generation X and the boomers, right? I grew up with cable TV. My upbringing was a little bit different, quite different than my siblings, especially my older ones, who are 20 years. My brother's 17 years older than me. My brother was in Vietnam, and my older sister was a couple years younger than my brother. Was a hippie, these things, and quite a difference in our generations, right? But as you get older, and there's less and less of your generation, and the young people just you don't understand them, they don't understand you. I mean, there's so many changes now. Kids who grew up on the internet, it's so much different for them. I mean, I can understand it more from being on the internet myself, all of us, but it's more of a observational understanding than a experiencing it myself, right? Our generation grew up in a way that's a dying. I mean, it's dying right now. We see it. That the older generations, people in their 40s and 50s, even in their late 30s, are seeing just a totally different lifestyle and orientation to life of the younger generation, and the way our culture's been changed and all of those things. And at some point, it's like everything that you were into, the things that were part of your wave of human life disappears, and the people around you disappear, and it's like, oh, okay, what am I doing here? My time's passed, right? I mean, there's this idea of a legacy and leaving things behind, but that doesn't exist anymore. Older people don't have that because younger people aren't in their lives, families aren't connected like they used to be. The younger people don't look up to the older people, right? Okay, boomer, right? There's this disconnect. There's no sense of going to the older generations. There's a total lack of understanding and things. I mean, this was like when the hippies were young. This was what they were, experiencing with the older generation, and the older generation not changing. And so it's like a death of something, right? It's the end of something. These eras, there's an end of these eras that happen. And when you're in an era, you're like, okay, it's hard to move forward and be a part of a new era. It doesn't matter. Your body's breaking down anyway. You're old, and you just don't have the fight for it anymore, right? You don't, your phase of life, your work, the things that you were supposed to contribute to have faded away, right? They're, it's in the past. And so, you move on, your soul moves on to something else, right? Most likely coming back here and starting over. I mean, that's 99.9% of the people, that's what happens. They, this is just a learning, it's like you're playing you're an avatar in a video game, and, your life ends, and then you come back and you try it again. I mean, this is what happens here on planet Earth, very similar to a video game. And eventually you learn enough, you graduate enough spiritually. I mean, that was how it was designed, so you'd move on to some other higher form of existence outside of life on planet Earth. But that's a very rare occurrence because most people get trapped here, lost, and their souls just never get a handle on life on planet Earth, and they go backwards, and they just accumulate more impressions, more grossness, more attachments, and they lose sight of their spiritual purpose, their divine purpose to move forward and get closer to God and divinity that's within them. So going back to this person's comment, right, that I'm supposed to figure out how sensitive people are and present things in a way, the frequency of it. Well, just don't listen. Like, that's, I mean, if you're too weak to handle it, like, I don't even know what to say about any of those types of things, right? I mean, so you want me to lie, right? You want me to withhold information for the people who need it or can start adjusting themselves and prepare or whatever, think about things in a different way. I mean, that's, why are we always focused on the weak, right? That's a modern day problem where you go to most schools and the gifted kids are ignored, and they're spending all their time on the remedial kids and the broken people and the weak people right now. I mean, this is what I've been talking about. And so I do my job here. I'm going to do an introduction on my other channel that's going to actually be in the Journey series as well. Not an introduction. There was something I wanted to say. I was going to put it on this channel today, but I'll put it on my other channel, and it'll also be in the Journey series, the same audio. And it's going to have to do with, what my job is here, what your job is, whatever it is, And despite everything you see, whatever your task is, whatever you're supposed to do in life, you have the ability to successfully do it. Despite all, I'll get into it more detail on my other channel today. And so for me, what I do here is what God shows me, and I cover whatever comes across my desk here, my computer, whatever it is, articles people send me, my own personal research I do, and whatever's going on, right? And with the idea that for me, the solution is that people have to connect with the divinity within them, connect with God, and become the best version of their self, like a divine expression of who they are, where their egos and their subtle bodies and their other parts of themselves is, a reflection of the purest soul aspect of their spiritual existence. And that people make decisions with their soul and the part of them that's divine, and they have a heart, a developed spiritual heart, and this is what the Sahaj Marg system does for people. And so, it's helped me in my life, and I believe it to be the solution for my own experience. And so this is a way to navigate whatever happens, good things, bad things, whatever happens in your life, it's a way to navigate it. And also, have this idea that changes are coming, because I can see them, and whatever I know about them, right, whatever I believe about them, that changes are coming, and some people have to survive. That's the idea of pockets of the future. People living now the way that everyone's going to live in the future. That always has to happen. When there's a paradigm shift, there's a transition, that always has to happen. And so it's for the people who can do that. This is for people who can be a part of the solution. And weak people who can't handle even the idea of these sort of generational changes, these epic changes, well, they're not really, this isn't my audience, right? This is the audience here is for people who can adapt in some way or help their future generations adapt. And I mean, that's what this movement's about, because the mainstream narratives are lies and deceptions, and it's all about keeping the beast going, keeping the system going. And when the system collapses, they don't care, right? The people who run the system, the people who are addicted to the system, the sheeple, they don't care. Like they can't live without the system. It's an all or nothing situation for them. And for many of us, older people, like we can see it, we can prepare for it the best we can, but it's just a big ask for people who have less jing, less prana in their system, less spiritual energy, less life force. And at some point, it just becomes it's just a beat down, right? You just how much you can take as an older person, how much you can adjust to, how much you can adapt. So it becomes helping other people, younger people, make this transition, right? People who can't see it yet because they haven't lived enough life, and they're haven't gained enough, like what would be considered wisdom or something like this, right? Their perceptual abilities aren't there yet, so older people are supposed to help them, coach them, and guide them through what needs to happen, right? And so the changes are coming, and no matter what there's changes always coming, but there are epic changes coming. I think most people have a sense at it. And those people who have the strength and the destiny and the internal capacity to endure, those are the people that would be my audience. Like, not that I think about it that way, but that's how the stuff's presented here. The strong will survive. The people who can have enough internal. Most people are bankrupt, and they just are vampires, ghouls. They just suck prana energy off of love energy off of other people. They don't have the ability to stand on their own 2 feet or work in a communal situation. They can't be in relationships where there's give and take. They just suck energy. They just feed off of other people in the system. And so those people aren't going to make it, right? They have no chance, because this is a system that helps the weak, helps the broken. In other systems, the broken and the weak can't survive because the system won't prop them up. And then their genetic line doesn't continue. We have a weakening, and it's not just weakened from people who are weak and crazy procreating and having their genetics pushed into other, young people, future generations. But people are weakened by the Wi-Fi and the malnutrition. Even though we have all this food, it's poor quality food, and all the TV, the bad energy, the bad lifestyle, all the stuff that makes us weaker, all the things that are, unnatural about our lives. And, people are really weak right now, and they're going to have to face something really hard, right? That's it in a nutshell, right? Everyone's really weak, and something really hard is coming in a collective experience. And so people either rise up to it or they don't. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.